Thank you. I have a little handout that's actually just sitting on the portfolio there. Thank you. It's just, I want to refer to some quotations from Gaudium et Spes, and to save you looking them up, they're in the handout. Just a single sheet. While it's going round, I have to say that in advance that what I'm going to present is not a theological paper. I'm not a theologian. I'm a professor of marketing, with all the good and the bad that signals. But I did spend 1 year studying theology here, exactly 20 years ago. It's my first semester here. It was a very special year in a couple of ways. One, the theological formation I had then has really guided me since then in my work, including in the creation of our business school at Catholic U. And those of you who've paid attention or looked at it will have noticed, you'll have sensed, I hope, the imprint of what goes on here on that school. But also, I just have to say that 5 days ago, Tuesday, was also the 20th anniversary of my first date with the woman who eventually became my wife, who I met, was not a student here, but 3 of her roommates were. So that's how I met her. So I got 2 very important things from the Institute. So my work and my family's. So I owe you a big debt of gratitude, and I'm delighted to be here. So in preparation for this paper, I knew that I was going to have to speak almost a year ago, so I had some time to think about how to prepare. And there were a number of events that I was able to orchestrate to help me with this. One was a series that is ongoing of communio-economics discussion groups that some of you are participating in, that I found certainly very helpful, and I'll draw from those discussions. Another was a series of debates between the philosopher Russ Hittinger and the economist Frederick Sauté. Dr. Sauté is a leading Austrian economist, also a convert to the Catholic faith, very seriously so, and so well in a good position to reflect on to what extent that branch of economics fits with our faith. And so I'll draw from the debate between the 2 of them as well. I'll start with just some foundational points. You should have the handout by now. I begin, of course, with 22 and 24, not just because if I didn't, you'd probably throw me out of the building, but it's to make the point that both 22, the mystery of the incarnate word, does the mystery of man take on light, and 24, man cannot find himself except through a sincere gift of himself, can and should apply to economic life. This is sort of more obvious to us after Caritas in Veritate, but reading even Gaudium et Spes, you could be excused for thinking not, and I'll say more about that in a moment. Number 57, on the importance of human work, which Dr. Schindler has just spoken so eloquently on. There I want to highlight, at risk of repeating, that Gaudium et Spes is talking about man imaging the Creator through work and also giving of himself, right? So place himself in the service of his brethren through work. And then number 63, the importance of the dignity of human person in economic life. But this has to be understood in the light of Gaudium et Spes 22. So the sentence, for man is the source, the center, and the purpose of all economic and social life, but understood in the sense that he's a mystery, only understood in the mystery of the incarnate word. Looking at economic questions, the obvious place to go in Gaudium et Spes is in part 2, of course, the special problems, chapter 3 in that, on economic and social life, kind of dead giveaway. But it's, I think, almost equally important to look at some other chapters in part 2. Chapter 2 on the proper development of culture, chapter 4 on the political community is very relevant, and particularly, and I'm sure you won't disagree, chapter 1 on marriage and family, all have great economic significance. So what I want to try to do with this is articulate some principles, or maybe even some imperatives for what, if we wanted to have an anthropology, a theological anthropology of the sort that we've been talking about today and yesterday, if we were to take that seriously in economic life, what would that have to look like today? So if you will, I'm trying to take some of the very deep thoughts that we've been listening to today and try to bring them down to day-to-day economic life, which is a challenge that in a sense every one of us faces every day because we go to work. So how do we think about that? The biggest challenge is one that David Schindler Sr. has highlighted, I think, very clearly, is that at the root of the modern economy is liberal individualism. And particularly in economic theory. Contemporary economic theory is perhaps the most liberal, the most utilitarian of theories. And so it becomes very difficult to realize the sort of theological anthropology in economics, particularly in theoretical economics, but also in practical economic life because of this, because of the many barriers that gives, because of the phenomenal inconsistencies between that worldview. And you can see this in economic life, and it's more true, more difficult, the more you move away from small human communities. So if you look at family businesses, small businesses, little entrepreneurial startups, they tend to be quite humane, just because the humanity of the people involved is right there, is very self-evident. But then they go public, as we say, and they get sold to many millions of shareholders, and they start to act like the theory says they should act, and they become inhumane and become much more narrowly kind of utilitarian. I've seen this in real life. Before coming to academia, I spent many years in the business world, and I remember observing in one particular company that had just gone public, somebody trying to do something nice for another employee who was suffering in a certain way, give them some extra time off or whatever, and being told, oh, we can't do that anymore. We're a public company now. We have to answer to our shareholders. So these distant shareholders mean that we have to start behaving like machines instead of human beings. There is even some empirical research, although this is debated, some studies that suggest that the more that students study economics, the more selfish and greedy they become. Because the theory tells them that that's the way human beings are, even though when you push an economist up against the wall, they admit, no, this is just a theory and it's approximation and it's useful. The people, they don't warn the students enough of that, because the students seem to think that that's true and therefore that's the way I should be. The next item on the handout I have is number 26. So we have this liberal conception. Gaudium Spes 26 has a definition of the common good, the sum of those conditions of social life which allow social groups and their individual members relatively thorough and ready access to their own fulfillment. It doesn't seem to help very much, because it feels like a very sort of liberal conception of the common good, just a sum total, right? There's not something that is inseparable. So liberal individualism is also at the root of modern political life, and you can't fix the economy without fixing political life, and vice versa. Thinking about this for the last 19 years since leaving the Institute, it's sometimes tempting to want to just throw up your hands and give up, because it just seems like an enormous challenge, right? So you have an economy that is thoroughly imbued with a liberal worldview, utilitarian, individualistic worldview, and a political life that is the same. So what to do? I have an Episcopalian friend who used to say proudly to me, we took your 10 commandments and replaced them with the 7 suggestions. So I want to give 7 suggestions too. Actually, I would dare call them 7 imperatives, must-haves. So if we had a theory of economics that took a theological anthropology seriously, what might they be? And these, I'm not saying these are the only 7 or even the most important, but there are 7 I think that are important. I'm just going to gloss over each. Each one could easily be a dissertation, I'm sure, but just to lay out a bit of a landscape of what we might be looking at. So the first one is to recognize the role of the family in economic flourishing and importance to economic life. I'm sure there'll be no disagreement of that here. So paragraph 47 in the handouts, the well-being of the individual person and of human and Christian society is intimately linked with the healthy condition of that community produced by marriage and family. Talks about the challenges to married love, and then moreover, serious disturbances are caused in families by modern economic conditions. So what the document here is saying is that bad economic life can affect family life negatively. It doesn't make the point, but I think we must, that the other direction, the causal direction runs the other way as well, which is healthy families lead to healthy economic life for various reasons. This is a point that I know both David Schindler Sr. and the late Stratford Caldecott have made as well, that family policy should be at the center of economic policy. I think that's exactly right. I do want to make a little caution. When I was in our business school, we decided, and this is still running, to insist on a course in marriage and family for all of the undergraduate business majors, so they would understand this. And when we first proposed this to our friends in the School of Theology, I remember Dean Madison was there, and we phrased it in a rather clumsy way. We said, we recognize that if somebody has a lousy family life, they won't be very effective at work, and therefore we want them to learn the theology of marriage and family. And the theologians justifiably said, you want to instrumentalize marriage so that you can be more successful at work. So it's like, no, that's not the point here at all. It's not the point. But the observation that unless the families are healthy, everything else about social life, including economic life, is going to suffer. And if you needed any convincing of that, there's extensive economic research that actually demonstrates this, is that when we're looking at material poverty, it's very rare in never divorced, intact, never divorced families. So husband and wife marry, stay together. The number of those families in the United States, about 12% of them are considered, kind of whatever definition, to be in material poverty. For families with a single parent, it's about 58%. So phenomenal difference. So poverty is primarily a single parent issue. The Heritage Foundation did an interesting exercise. They said they tried to calculate what would happen if all of the children living in poverty with single parents today, if their parents were actually married, and something like 80% of material poverty would disappear if that were the case, if the parents had been married or had stayed married. Other research indicates, I like this one, that allowing for age, experience, and so on, married men earn 27% more money than single men, again, assuming the same skills, the same experience, and so on. And the indication seems to be that you just work harder when you have people depending on you. And I just, from my own married experience, I would say, yeah, I think that's true. And so again, not in any way to instrumentalize marriage and family, but just to point out that an economic theory that ignores marriage, that doesn't make it central, is already kind of doomed from the start to have a very unrealistic view of the world. So that's the first point. The second point is straight from Caritas in Veritate, number 36, to make room for gratuitousness in economic life. And here I'm sort of paralleling a little bit the marvelous remarks that David just made. I would extend that beyond just work to all of economic life, as Benedict did. So gratuitousness, right? Doing something for its own sake, doing something because it contributes to, because it's true, because it's beautiful, because it's good. But see a problem with Gaudium et Spes. So go back to paragraph 57 again in your handout. I quoted the first part of 57 at the top of the handout, where it says, when we work, we image the Creator, we give of ourselves to others. Paragraph 57 continues to say, when man gives himself to the various disciplines of philosophy, history, and of mathematical and natural science, and when he cultivates the arts, he can do very much to elevate the human family to a more sublime understanding of truth, goodness, and beauty. I don't think, or certainly I hope, that the Council Fathers did not intend this distinction, but it seems like when you work, you serve others. When you do philosophy, theology, and so on, then you serve truth, beauty, and goodness. As if to say, don't try to do that in work. Work is kind of tilling the ground. Philosophy and theology is when you truly think about truth, goodness. Again, I hope they didn't intend that distinction, but it certainly comes across that way. And it's a common assumption, that work is for money, as so David was pointing out. There are other things you do to reach for truth, beauty, and goodness, when we really need to see them happening together. So that's the second point, to the making room for gratuitousness in economic life. The third, so I think you're with me on the first two. The third one might be a little bit more tricky, is to understand the necessary but subordinate role of markets in economic life. So paragraph 64 refers to an inventive spirit, an eagerness to create and to expand enterprises must be promoted, seems to suggest approval of some kind of a market economy, something that then St. John Paul II in Centesimus Annus gives a qualified endorsement for. The danger with looking at market economies, Adrian Walker put very nicely in his chapter on the poverty of liberal economics, from some years ago, quote, liberal economics surreptitiously weighs freedom in the direction of self-interest understood as financial gain. So the market economy pretends, like all of liberalism, to be neutral, right? But in actual fact has a strong leaning towards, in particular, sort of utilitarianism and particularly financial gain. And this way, to me, the Hittinger and Sauté debate that I referred to before, which will be published by Seaway Press, was really, really valuable. I think the outcome of the debate was that the market order is an instrument, an important instrument, but the error that Austrian economics and much of economics makes is that it elevates the market order, or what the Austrian economists call spontaneous order, to an end in itself, as a sort of, if you will, a guiding principle for society overall, when it really should be relegated to just an instrument. But there is an important insight from the Austrians, from Friedrich Hayek, Ludwig von Mises, that we mustn't throw out. I think this is a very important insight. And the insight they have is on what they call the impossibility of central planning. The impossibility of central planning, because without markets, if there aren't markets in a society, you cannot have prices. Because prices are by definition subjective. They are discovered through markets. You cannot objectively assess the price of a thing just by looking at it, measuring it, studying it. That's a meaningless idea. There's no external way or objective way to measure a price of a thing other than merely subjectively figuring out what people are willing to pay for it. And so without prices, you cannot decide whether a house, for example, should be better made out of wood or brick or stainless steel. Okay, because you might make choices that are artistic, you might make choices from understanding the materials, but deciding, do we have enough of those materials, and is it a waste to use stainless steel, or is it a waste to use brick? Is it a waste to get people spending their time making bricks when they could be chopping down trees? How do we decide? It turns out that it's impossible, that it becomes mathematically impossible, and so this is why throughout history, somehow you've always had markets of one form or another, which put prices on things, which allow people to decide what things are worth. When I say worth, in sort of just in practical terms here. So it's why socialist economies invariably collapse. It's not just because, as Margaret Thatcher said, you run out of other people's money. It's because you just make poor decisions. You make poor decisions in terms of allocating scarce resources. So enough of that. I'll say a little bit more though. So the third point was about markets. The fourth is about property. And what we need, the imperative here is to bring a Catholic understanding of property into economics. So paragraph 71, Gaudium says private property or some ownership of external goods confers on everyone a sphere wholly necessary for the autonomy of the person and the family, and it should be regarded as an extension of human freedom. I've always thought that was a very nuanced and insightful sentence. The point being, it's private property is necessary for living out our personhood, living out our human autonomy. It's not mine because it's mine. You know, the sort of the contemporary view of private property, or the classical, if you will. It's part of living out our personhood. Then we've got paragraph 64 and 69, the obligations for how to use our property, and here they're drawing from Aquinas' distinction between ownership and use of property, very important. The fundamental finality of production, so of stuff, right, is not the mere increase of products nor profit, but the service of man. Indeed, the whole man, for the full range of his material needs and demands of his intellectual, moral, spiritual, and religious life. And then paragraph 69, there God intended the earth with everything contained in it. So the universal destination of created goods, right, is being affirmed there. The the insight that I want to bring up here, which I think is a complement to my earlier point about the importance of markets, this is one that David C. brought up in our most recent communio economics discussion. Even though prices are always only subjective measures, they never tell the full story. The price of a thing doesn't tell, again, this might seem obvious to you, but I want to say it so that you know that I know it. The price of a thing doesn't describe the worth of a thing in human terms, right? And in fact, sometimes there's a big mismatch between the price of a thing and the human worth of a thing. A $100,000 car costs as a price way more than it is worth as a human thing, right? It's just a silly waste of time, and money. Whereas, thankfully, a walk in the woods costs a lot less than its worth in human terms, right? So the imperative for a theological anthropology-based economics is that we bring this deeper understanding of property, so that we recognize that prices are important and play an important role in the economy, but not all of our decisions should be driven by the prices of things, because there's inherent worth in created goods. So that's point 4. Point 5 is to understand economics as a normative theory. Economists have this conceit that economics is a purely descriptive theory. They will say that, tell us, we have no preconceived notions, tell us what you want to achieve, what the kind of society you want to achieve, and we'll tell you how to get there. Gaudium Spes has no pretense at not being normative, of course. Number 68 gives guidance about how administration and profits in enterprises should be shared. Number 70 talks about investments should be directed towards procuring employment and sufficient income for the people both now and in the future. So a theory of economics that takes a theological anthropology seriously should begin with a statement, some kind of statement of the finality of human existence, and recognize that all economic activity is ordered to that, and not apologize for that, right? Contemporary economics pretends that it's not normative, but then there's all kinds of norms that are hidden and you've seen that argument made before. Number 6, that we should take the principle of subsidiarity seriously. Paragraph 74 talks about how the political community exists consequently for the sake of the common good, in which it finds its full justification and significance. And then number 75, rulers must be careful not to hamper the development of families, social or cultural groups, nor of that of intermediate bodies or organizations. I see this in the social doctrine again and again and again. We talk about subsidiarity and the importance of subsidiarity, and we affirm it again and again. But then we make these normative requests, so that this should be done and that should be done, the other should be done. We don't say who should do them. And so the default, the assumption always, well, then the state should. There should be a law, there should be a regulation, right? Because otherwise this won't happen. I think you can debate who this is directed at, but I don't think you can debate how it's interpreted. Most people interpret it as, therefore, we need state regulation. And if you look, in fact, at paragraph 75, comes straight out. It says, the complex circumstances of our day make it necessary for public authority to intervene more often in social, economic, and cultural matters in order to bring about favorable conditions which will give more effective help to citizens and groups in their free pursuit of man's total well-being. So they want more intervention. And that's the kind of the society we live in today. There's a very heavy intervention with some really serious risks and really serious consequences. One of the best ways to illustrate this is a theory, what's called the theory of regulatory capture. The theory of regulatory capture says that whenever you have regulations, invariably over time, the effect of those regulations will be tilted to benefit those who are regulated rather than the supposed beneficiaries of the regulation, because those who are regulated tend to be smaller in number, therefore easier to coordinate, and much more powerful than those who benefit from the regulation. So just give an example. most electrical utilities are regulated. They have to follow specific regulations. There's a board that regulates them. Contrast how much time you spend thinking about the price of electricity in any given month, right? Probably once a month, as you write your bill, you curse and you send it, you send your check in, right? That's the extent of your thinking. Or if you have a lot of kids who never turn out the lights, then you maybe think about it a little bit more often. Turn out those lights, So contrast that with how much time the economists and lobbyists working for the electrical utilities spend thinking about the price of electricity. It's a full-time job for them. They are experts, right? They devote all of their time to lobbying and trying to influence that regulation. Add to that the fact that most industries are so complicated now that the regulators themselves often have to come from the industry to have any kind of expertise to regulate it, and are often given not exactly the promise, but in effect, they are hired once they retire early back into those industries. So it's this whole unholy process where regulation looks like it's supposed to be helping us, but is really just contributing to what Alistair McIntyre has called the new Leviathan, right? This sort of unholy alliance between the very large corporations and the state to just get as much money out of us as they can, right? Just to put it in very simple terms. Once politics becomes a tool for the extraction of wealth from everybody else, we're all in really deep trouble. And I think if we look around, we're pretty close to that line if we haven't already crossed over it. And so we need to find some way to take the principle of subsidiarity seriously and say that these farces that pretend to be, or these pretenses of subsidiarity, really aren't what they are, aren't subsidiarity. One of the worst things to ever happen to the concept of subsidiarity, I think, was for the EU to adopt it as one of their founding principles. Because everybody looks at that and says, oh, that's subsidiarity, I don't want any of it, So I was in a restaurant in Orvieto, a lovely little town north of Rome, talking to the restaurateur. She had her own little restaurant, and she was telling me how she can't buy eggs locally anymore. She was trying to run one of these sort of local foods restaurants and trying to buy everything from within a few miles. There are farms all around Orvieto. She says, I can't buy eggs anymore. I said, why not? She says, not from around here anyway. She says, because the EU just passed a law that all of the eggs have to be washed before they can be sold. She says, would have been fine, except the EU also passed a law that said which machine you had to buy to wash those eggs. And it costs about 20,000 euros. So it's not just a matter of scrub the eggs as they go by. And she says most of these farmers, all of these farmers can't afford a 20,000 euro egg washing machine. So that's subsidiarity in action, European style, right? So that's number 6. And the 7th one is a recovery. And this one I realize is a speech entirely to itself, so I'll just give you 2 lines. The recovery of the original insight, the original medieval insight into usury. The idea that inanimate matter by itself is not fruitful, and therefore it's immoral to require payment for a loan of something that does not contribute to the creation of material wealth. So those are the seven principles, probably not leaving you any happier than I started out with. So to conclude, do I have another 5 minutes? I do, okay. I'll use my last 5 minutes to give some very practical suggestions for living out each of the 7 imperatives. Because unless you happen to be a lobbyist or the leader of a political party, there's probably not much you can do with any of these 7 imperatives right now. So I'm going to try and give you something that's more practical. Number 1 should be very easy, right? So recognizing the role of the family in economic flourishing. Hopefully you're all already doing this anyway. So striving to grow holy families and helping others to do so. The second one, making room for gratuitousness in economic life. I think a lot of the things that David recommended would fit in over here. As we live, as we make our economic decisions, we shouldn't always be looking for the best deal for the cheapest thing, You don't have to go to Home Depot if there's still a local hardware store where they're nice to you, just because Home Depot is 5 cents cheaper. And try to find work, if you can, that allows you to contribute to what is true, good, and beautiful. Always recognizing that we have responsibility to support our families, but as much as possible, we try to find careers that will contribute to truth, to goodness, and beauty, that allows us to bring more gratuitousness into our own economic lives, and that's a good start. I was trying to think of a practical thing to do with number 3, understand the necessary but subordinate role of markets, and I couldn't really because there they are, you know. But let's just say we shouldn't talk too badly about them, you know. So number 4, bring a Catholic understanding of property into economics. I think this is something we can all try to live, to recognize that it is a good thing to accumulate property, that it brings autonomy and stability to family life. So no matter how poorly we are paid, we should strive to save money, if at all possible, strive to invest it in worthy enterprises, and also strive to give some of it away, so that we are living the universal destination of goods. Number 5, understand economics as a normative theory. The practical implication here, I think, is to remember that the economy, that economic life is not a moral-free zone. I'm amazed at how sometimes otherwise good, faithful Catholics revert to, you know, being economic man when it's time to sell your house, for example. You know, we just sort of neglect to mention a serious defect in the house, you know, because we think that's going to affect the price of the house. Or I remember hearing one fellow telling me he was trying to start a firm where he would be an investment firm, and he would invest only in companies that honored a life ethic, or at least didn't violate a pro-life ethic. And one of the potential investors, who's, again, supposedly Catholic, said to him, "But are we going to make less money because of that?" I said, "Well, maybe, but is that the calculus? Okay, so more babies die so you can make more money? I mean, how does that..." So it seems obvious, but it's frightening how many people don't see the moral implications of our economic actions. Number 6, take the principle of subsidiarity seriously. So, you know, think about working with neighbors, friends to solve local problems, and don't ever say the government should do something, because that's often the beginning of the problem, yeah? And then number 7, recover the original insight of usury. I doubt that many of you are money lenders, but the other side of the transaction can be very useful for us to keep in mind, and that is, don't ever borrow money and pay interest on it, except to save money or to earn more money. So okay to borrow money for school if it's going to help you get a better job. Okay to borrow money to buy a house if it's going to save you the rent money, right? Not okay to borrow for school if you're just studying for personal growth. If you are, then study part-time and work, and do it on a pay-as-you-go basis. Don't ever borrow to buy a car, to go on vacation, and don't ever run up a balance on your credit card. So there you go. It doesn't get much more practical than that, does it? Just one last thing before I wrap up. I find as a great source of inspiration for a theological anthropology-based economy is Tolkien, the Shire. And I once wrote a little paper. It's not the most profound thing I ever did, but it was certainly the most fun, called Shire Economics. It was published in the St. Austin Review, and I have some copies on the corner of the table there, along with hand-drawn illustrations, which I didn't do. So please help yourselves if you want those, and thank you very much.